This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 343 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Something that's been on my mind recently sort of stems from a discussion that's been happening on this show over the last couple of weeks. When a rookie wide receiver or running back is unproductive, is it an opportunity to buy that player, or should you actually be selling them? N'Keal Harry is a perfect example. He was a top-rated asset in rookie drafts last year, but an injury derailed his early season potential. And then when he found the field, he wasn't all that productive. Some people now see Harry as a very clear buy candidate. According to DynastyLeagueFootball.com's January startup average draft position data, Harry's listed at wide receiver 29. He's behind others from this class like DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, and Terry McLaurin. But some see Harry as someone to sell because of what we've seen historically with wide receivers who didn't do a whole lot as rookies. So what should you do if you have an underperforming rookie? If you've got N'Keal Harry or Andy Isabella or Damian Harris, how should you handle managing those assets? I'll talk about that on today's show. But before digging in, I don't know if you guys heard, but the Super Bowl is this weekend. And a big game calls for a big contest. FanDuel's Big Game Bowl is back in a big way for the Super Bowl with $3 million in prize money. And that includes $1 million to first place. And it's all for just $9. Select 5 players, turn on the game, and take your shot at one of the biggest paydays in the industry. For more details, visit FanDuel.com/NFL or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. So our goal in rookie drafts is to find players who not just outperform their average draft position, but players who can give us real production over one or multiple years. For the purpose of any study like this, we've got to sort of set arbitrary parameters. So I'm going to be examining players who have had at least one top 20 season at their position since 2011, as well as players who have had more than one top 20 season over that time frame. That's going to help us define what being successful is. Because if the goal here is to see whether or not someone like N'Keal Harry will ever be successful after a bad rookie season, there needs to be some definition around the term successful. Since 2011, we've had 75 different wide receivers finish with at least one top 20 season. And we've had 85 running backs finish with at least one top 20 season as well. 46 wideouts have done it multiple times, and 49 running backs have done it more than once. The question to ask then is, how did those players perform during their rookie campaigns? How did successful fantasy assets do when they were rookies? Let's just keep this fairly simple and straightforward and just look at fantasy points scored. Among the 75 wide receivers who have had at least one top 20 season since 2011, 79% of them had 50 or more PPR fantasy points during their rookie season. That 50 number is arbitrary, just for the record, as is 100 points, which was hit by 61% of the wideouts. And 28% of them had 160 or more points, which is usually the wide receiver 40 range. Only 3 wideouts of the 75 wide receiver sample scored fewer than 20 fantasy points during their rookie season. And actually, those 3 players, Vincent Jackson, Wes Welker, and Victor Cruz, they all ended up with multiple top 20 seasons since 2011. Now, because I mentioned Victor Cruz and Vincent Jackson, you may be wondering about injuries. Obviously, a player isn't going to do very well if he sustained an injury as a rookie. Victor Cruz played just 3 games because of one, and Vincent Jackson started his career off with injuries too. Now, as I mentioned, about 79% of wide receivers with at least one top 20 season had 50 or more fantasy points as rookies. Of the 21% who didn't, and we'll call this group the underachievers, but of the 21% who didn't, which is 16 wide receivers, 3 of them didn't get there because of injury. Now, to be honest, I don't think this tells us that we absolutely need to give up on players who were completely unproductive during their rookie year. Not that fact. I mean, if you look at players with more than one top 20 season over this time, you've got 46 wide receivers. 46 wideouts have had 2 or more top 20 seasons since 2011. Of those 46, 7 of them didn't have a big injury during their rookie year while also finishing with fewer than 50 fantasy points. Basically, 15% of the wide receivers with 2 or more top 20 seasons since 2011, 15% of those guys were bad as rookies. And it wasn't because of an injury. That's not necessarily a death sentence. It's not great, but we've seen bad rookie campaigns turn into usable fantasy careers. But I want to say probably the most important thing to point out here is the investment made by teams to get those players. Among the rookie wide receiver underachievers since 2011, and I'm looking at all underachievers here, so not just players with more than one top 20 season, but of the underachievers, only one player was drafted higher than 60th overall in the NFL draft. That was Mike Williams, who was injured during his rookie year. Meanwhile, 6 of the 15 players in the rookie underachievers group went undrafted. Think about what this means. We've got this sample of successful fantasy wide receivers who have had at least one top 20 season over the last 9 years. Of those 75 wideouts, 16 of them failed to score 50 points as rookies. Of those 16 wide receivers, only one of them was really highly sought after entering the draft. 6 of them were completely undrafted. And I have a theory about this. Players who were drafted late or players who went undrafted, they either, number one, didn't get a fair shot to play right away, or number two, they weren't as ready for the NFL at the time of the draft, but they were able to develop into something better. So I do think that you should be worried if you have a highly drafted wide receiver who failed to perform in year one while also not getting hurt. There's a lot of worry about J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. He's not someone that I would be buying right now because of this information. And as hard as this is for me to say, the same probably goes for Andy Isabella. Both guys were second-round picks. They were at least active for a lot of games, and they still didn't produce. That gives them pretty rough odds to succeed later down the road. And I do think this exercise hurts other 2019 year one failures like N'Keal Harry and Paris Campbell. It lowers their potential overall ceiling in the league. We likely would have seen something from them during their rookie year if they had a high probability of succeeding later on in their career. I don't think it's necessary to sell those players versus the Arcega-Whiteside or the Isabella types, but it's something to keep in mind. I'll also discuss the market a little bit later on. Before that, though, I want to talk about running backs. Like I said earlier, we've had 85 different running backs give us a top 20 season since 2011. Of those 85, 64 of them had 50 or more points during the rookie season, or 75% of them did. 56% of them had 100 or more points. But we should note that running backs outside the elite guys in fantasy are generally scoring less than wide receivers are, which is part of the reason we see lower numbers at these thresholds. I'm going to continue looking at these arbitrary cutoffs here, though, because it's the easiest way to sort of explain what's going on. And even though they're arbitrary, they still tell us a usable story. Essentially, there are fewer success stories for running backs who didn't produce as rookies versus wide receivers. If you just look at the bottom of the barrel, or running backs who failed to score 30 points as rookies, but then went on to have at least one top 20 season, you get 15 guys. Among those 15, 4 of them went undrafted, and all but one, with that one being Shane Vereen, who wasn't anything special as a fantasy asset, but all but one was drafted after pick 100 of the NFL draft. So basically, if you've got a second or third round running back who didn't do a thing in year one, you should be worried about that player. The odds that Damian Harris really pans out are pretty slim. And you can even make the argument for a back who I thought was one of the best in the class last year, and that's Darrell Henderson. Based on what we see from running backs drafted in the first 3 rounds, Henderson's got a lot of volatility moving forward. And the other thing to point out here is that of the players in our 85 running back sample who hit 100 or fewer points during their rookie seasons, which accounts for 38 of the 85, only 17 were able to finish in the top 20 at the position for more than 1 year. And just 6 were able to do it for more than 2 years. Now, I know that this just sounds like a lot of random data, but let me explain it in a more concise way. Earlier on the show, I mentioned that a wide receiver 40 performance usually hovers the 160 point mark in PPR formats year in and year out. And among our wide receivers who had at least one top 20 performance since 2011, 29% of them were able to hit that mark as rookies. They were able to be wide receiver 40s or better. But the average running back 40 performance through the years equaled 117 points. That's a lot less than 160. Among top 20 running back performers since 2011, we're looking at 49% of them hitting that mark as rookies. That's 20% higher than at wide receiver. And get this, if you look at wideouts who had more than one top 20 season since 2011, those wide receivers had an identical rate of being wide receiver 40s or better during their rookie year as the subset of wideouts with just one or more top 20 season. They were identical. For running backs, 57% of backs with 2 or more top 20 performances since 2011 ended up hitting that RB40 threshold as a rookie. That's significantly higher than at wide receiver. So this might be confusing, but it does tell us 2 things. First, and we know this, but running backs are going to pan out at a much higher rate as rookies than wide receivers will. That's just generally why we see a higher rate of successful fantasy backs doing well when they're rookies. But second, if you want sustained success at running back, or more than one random top 20 season, then chances are you're going to need that running back to be pretty damn productive during his rookie year. The same isn't as relevant at wide receiver. So let's assume that Josh Jacobs was terrible in year one. We know N'Keal Harry was bad, but let's just assume that Jacobs was bad too. If that was the case, then what this is telling me is that I should have more faith in Harry becoming something more significant than I would with Josh Jacobs. Because early career production for running backs is more revealing for future success than it is at wide receiver. And if you've got a dude who didn't perform his rookie year and you can't really blame it on injury, there's a very small likelihood that that player is going to work out, especially if he was a higher round pick. But this doesn't exactly answer the question of, should you then buy or sell these players? Like, if everyone followed these rules, then Darrell Henderson would be close to worthless. But there's still a market for him. One of the things that's not talked about enough with this type of analysis is what's actually going on in the market and what the alternative is. For example, let's say that you've got Darrell Henderson. He could absolutely still pan out, and I hope that he does. But we now know the odds of it happening aren't very great. But let's say that you've got Henderson and the best offer is a 4th round rookie pick. This is obvious, but you shouldn't automatically accept that deal just because you know that Henderson's probability to give you a top 20 season isn't very high. Now, I'm referencing probability for a reason. There's still a chance that he works out. But also, you have to compare those odds to the odds that you'll find something better in the 4th round of your rookie draft. Let's not sit back and pretend that 4th round picks have high hit rates. But I will say, chances are the market is overvaluing the potential of these players who didn't perform as rookies. If you want to play the odds, it's likely that you're better off selling the down first year as opposed to buying it. Think of it this way. Let's look at Damian Harris. He tallies 12 total yards this year. Of the backs with at least one top 20 performance since 2011, only Spencer Ware, Joique Bell, and Justin Forsett were that bad during their rookie season. That's 3.5% of the sample. Meanwhile, since 2011, we've seen better hit rates from 4th round rookie picks according to MyFantasyLeague.com's average draft position data. Whether it's Alfred Morris, Tariq Cohen, Aaron Jones, Chris Carson, Dion Lewis, CJ Anderson, the hit rate there is actually better than the odds of Harris working out when strictly looking at rookie season production. And it's because rookie draft ADP isn't all that predictive. So with all that being said, it's probably best in these cases to move on and try to get the most that you can for these players before they inevitably become worthless. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, even if you're not, do me a favor and leave a rating and review. You can also follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you later in the week with the mailbag episode.